Hello. Welcome, everybody. Thanks to my co-panelist. As you will have seen, our panel will focus on cooperation and sustainability, clearly a hot topic. Of course, the whole point is about the opportunities and the threats. And we thought good mixture of practitioner and in-house lawyers could provide some insight on how is this working in practice and what is the effect or what could have been better after the publication of the European Commission guidelines on horizontal cooperation. So we have quite a full agenda. And just to give you a bit of a whistle-stop of what's going to happen, my colleague Giorgio Candeloro will start to remind ourselves of what are the key recent developments and the applicable framework. Then over to Alessandro Di Gio, who will also briefly provide input from an external legal advisor, but the core of that is really from our in-house specialists, and I'm quite glad that other than Nicole Calo, we also have Giampiero, who is an engineer, so not only a perspective from an in-house lawyer, but we will also hear from the business and the engineering point of view about the opportunities and challenges. So as I said, it's a packed agenda, so I'll already hand over to Giorgio.
Thanks, thanks, Ermelinda. Just to give you, we can start with the first presentation, thanks. And eventually, yesterday evening I will give you a bit of spoiler on this presentation. We were wondering ourselves whether to add a question mark at the end of the title of this presentation, but eventually we decided not to put it. So this is just to anticipate to you that maybe it's time, it's really time to have a clear view, a clear institutional framework where companies should feel safe to act to achieve the very challenging environmental goals. So where do we come from and where we're heading? So we start from the very beginning where in an antitrust assessment of different cases, both merger and infringement under 101, there was a first consideration of non-economic interest, which were somehow considered in their assessment to be outweighed or not, or balanced with the benefits that could have come from restriction of competition in different cases back in 30, 40 years ago. And they were taken into account, even if it was just at the very beginning, non-economic interest has started to be considered. Then there was the time where the environmental issue came, and there were many cases, but maybe our landmark decision is the one on the washing machine producers, where the Commission, maybe one of the first time, decided to approve and competitive a restriction of competition, given the benefits that could have come from in terms of environmental benefits and reduced costs of energy and also reduced level of CO2 emissions, coupled with an even lower use of water. This is the landmark decision when maybe for the first time the environmental argument has played a key role in saying that one competitive restriction could be justified. Then there was 10 years ago maybe one key case specifically in the energy sector where the companies, and this was under the attention of the Dutch competition authorities, decided that it was time to move on and agree on the shutting down of coal power plants to the benefit of the environment. But this, of course, could have meant a price increase. And under the Dutch competition authorities' view, this was not outweighed in terms of benefits. So the price increase, which should have come anyway, given the cheaper cost of coal, did not play a sufficient role to offset the increased price for the consumers, and so the authority decided this was not enough. And this was the real past. In the last maybe 5-7 days, there was a revival of environmental-related agreements since the climate crisis kicked in, and more companies try to find a good balance between moving on, trying to develop new technologies, and of course this also to some extent trying to limit competition among them to find some common synergies. And maybe of these cases, this slide wants just to show you that there have been both national and competition in European cases, and maybe the German authority was more keen on trying to find a new balance in terms of some agreements, which anyway had specific cases like in the milk and banana cases. While on the other side, of course, everyone knows the AdBlue case in the Commission, where, as we will see later on, was one case where the premises were good, let's say, and the Stagger's point of view, but the outcome was not what was not allowed and couldn't be allowed under competition rules, and it was heavily fined. If we move, then we have one slide on the real recent case, again, of the Dutch Competition Authority of this CO2 storage, new storage facilities, where Giampiero Goretti will tell us more, and which is strictly related to some regulatory issues and types of reasoning, which is typically of the energy sector, when some part of the benefits have to be shared in terms of percentage to the final customers. And I make reference to the third-party access, and Giampiero will go on this. So we know that this is a risky area, and we have seen that there have been past decisions, and it's clear, however, that from the European Commission, collaboration cannot be tolerated when it becomes collusion. So everyone agrees on the need to achieve the energy transition, but from the Commission point of view, it's important that this is done trying to be as efficient as possible. And so this is the very clear point of view of the Commission. Why this is a risky area, why this is a hot topic, we would say, the sustainability agreements, also in light of the new guidelines, and we will develop further. Well, because usually the private companies which deal with these new objectives are huge companies with high market shares, which move them away from safe harbors or soft safe harbors under the new guidelines. And maybe also another hot topic in this, which is very famous or infamous under our practice, is the risk of competition information exchange, which is something inherent to the competition assessment in terms of collaboration between undertakings. And then, of course, this is some point to be kept in mind, which is always important, that sustainability goals shouldn't be treated or considered as a sort of justification, and the risk of greenwashing is stronger than ever. And one famous expression is greenwashing cartels, so the Commission on this is very clear. You cannot mask a cartel under the excuse and the mask of a sustainable target. And the proof of evidence of this attention of the EU institution, for instance, the recent investigation in the fashion industry, where the objectives were ESG compliant, but this wouldn't mean that the European Commission avoid a proper down rate at the premises of these companies. Why this is even more difficult when you look at a global perspective? Because European and US agencies have a different approach, okay? So while the European, it can be considered a bit softer and open, also in light of the new guidelines in considering potential ESG topics or benefits, even if these, of course, shouldn't lower the bar of their attention or the level of scrutiny. In the US, and this is driven also by the political debate, which is on everyday's journals, it's ESG are seen as a potential source of collusion, and this is of course a matter of Senate and politicians, but this is reflected also on how, for instance, the FTC like to clear and say it loudly that, and I really like the sentence here, that the FTC won't challenge an otherwise legal deal if it has an ESG benefit, and it was really clearly said that they are mistaken, so that the US authority will proceed anyway, and even if there are ESG benefits. So this is the framework in terms of risk, but we know that collaboration also among private companies is essential. The market is asking for it, and the climate crisis is moving and pushing the companies and institutions to find an agreement on this topic. We have already in place, and we know it, we have seen the previous case law, but we have also the legal basis where we can have some comfort in assessing whether a certain cooperation among companies can be allowed or cannot be allowed under competition law. And we know that regulation, ex-ante regulation, is very useful when you have, especially when you have more precise and small topic, let's say at national level, that can be achieved. But if we look at the huge policy objective and the new goals, for instance, the net zero or the Green Deal, we know that regulation can achieve only a partial solution, can provide the companies only with a partial solution, because actually it doesn't provide the companies with the means to achieve these goals. And we also know that in this area, it's often verified, and also thanks to the economists, the market failures, clear market failures that cannot be taken into account by companies when achieving and trying to pursue ESG objective. On the other side, private companies know that this has become a competitive element that final clients and customers want to see if the company is in compliance with ESG targets. And so it's very important that we find a good balance between the risk and what is allowed or not. So moving on, what we know, where are the safe harbors, what is already known that can be done? Of course, it can be done what is already by law, regulated by law. It's even more than regulated, so there are at national level some consortia which by law make the companies cooperate to be more efficient and to be more ESG compliant. Then there are some specific regulatory tools, I would say, like, as we read here, the joint undertakings, where the European Commission is part as well. And but these, of course, like these joint undertakings, like with Industrial Alliance, are very specific, are only limited to specific topics, where the private operators and the companies can give their feedback and try to pursue that an ESG objective. Not only at European level, we have alliance also at global level with UN specific alliance, again, only limited to specific topics of particular interest. So we are in front of a very imperfect mechanism, because actually the same regulatory frameworks I've just mentioned, like the alliance or the joint undertakings, do not exempt and do not provide the companies with completely safe harbors. The same Commission, when dealing with these tools, make the companies well aware that these tools, where the EU Commission is part of them as well, cannot be used as a platform or as a place where companies are allowed to exchange competitively sensitive information. So even within these regulatory tools, there is a risk of antitrust infringement. And this risk of sanctions and antitrust infringements is especially felt by the private companies that in some cases, as we have read on the newspapers, prefer to withdraw from this alliance. So it is something which really has an impact on the development and achieving of the ESG goals. So moving ahead, well, we are with this panel looking at tomorrow. And of course, we have the new guidelines. We somehow look back to the previous version, and they go over with a new section specifically on sustainability. Then national authorities are going to publish specific and further guidelines on how they will deal with this. And then there is a new tool which is represented by the comfort letters, which also can be helpful in dealing with this kind of assessment. Of course, we don't know if this is enough. We will talk, the other panelists will move on. But on the other side, where we have certainty, we have 100% certainty. It's a very limited in scope. For instance, there are specific areas of industry, like in the common agricultural area, where regulations have clearly agreed and provided companies with an exemption, nearly took over like a blanket exemption from the application of 101 rules, and this somehow it's an option that should maybe consider, given that, as we will, the other panelists will be more precise on this, the safe harbor somehow implies anyway some thresholds also in terms of market share. So, and this is what I have to say on this.
Thank you, Giorgio, for this whistle-stop tour. I think it's very clear that it's both a threat and an opportunity, and certainty is really what will drive the conduct of the companies, or the lack of certainty. So quickly to Alessandro to give a bit more details on the framework that is in front of us, and then we'll go over to our in-house experts.
Thank you, Ermelinda. Thanks, Giorgio, for your overview. And now I'll be actually focusing a bit more on the horizontal guidelines, and more specifically about the new chapter which has been added in the horizontal guidelines about sustainability agreements. I'll start by just a few words on the broader antitrust regulatory framework when it comes to horizontal cooperation agreements. Clearly, as we all know, we have on one side the block exemption regulations, which provide safe harbor from the application of Article 101, provided that certain conditions are met in terms of market shares or in terms of absence of hardcore restrictions or excluded restrictions. Leaving aside the sector-specific block exemption regulations, those which are more relevant in the sustainability sector are clearly the specialization agreements and the research and development agreements block exemption regulations, which have been just readopted alongside the horizontal guidelines in June 2023. And clearly also the block exemption regulation on technology transfer agreements can be of relevance in this sector, although clearly they also apply to license transfers between known competitors. And as all know, clearly once and if an agreement does not fall within the scope of a block exemption regulation, the individual assessment under Article 101 steps in, and that is clearly the context in which the new horizontal guidelines come into play for providing guidance on how to apply Article 101 to specific cases. The review process of the horizontal guidelines and related block exemption regulation, it's all behind us, no need to spend time on it, but it's still worth mentioning that there was a small section on environmental agreements on the old horizontal guidelines of 2001, and notably that was instead not included in the previous horizontal guidelines of 2010, which have just been replaced a few months ago. Just very quickly on the overview of the key changes of the horizontal guidelines, in addition to the new chapter on the sustainability agreements, there have been other additions on building consortia, buying cartels, and research and development and innovation aspects, which may come into play also in the evaluation of sustainability agreements. Let's get to sustainability agreements and to how they've been treated within the guidelines. So this new chapter in the horizontal guidelines start with some fairly broad and general statements, which, however, are to some extent not obvious and deserve some attention. So that there is a broad statement about, or at least a reference of what the objectives of competition law are, and an attempt to say that basically those objectives are not in contradiction with sustainable development, and sustainable development can actually be the competition law can contribute to sustainable development. But we've thought that it was somewhat interesting that in the sentence recalling the main objective of competition law, output increase was absent, which is possibly notable given that it is traditionally the main objective of competition law alongside price reduction, and that may signal the willingness to somewhat avoid that potential trade-off, which is inherent to the very relationship between competition law, or even more broadly, capitalism and sustainability. At the same time, the new horizontal guidelines do refer to negative externalities of individual production and consumption decisions as a basis for justifying horizontal agreements pursuing sustainability objectives. Maybe a comment which may be made in regard of this section is that in the broader debate happening now about the possibility of expanding the objectives of competition law, some may claim that referring to market failure may be a narrow basis for justifying these agreements, but admittedly this was the space, the room the Commission could move within. Going forward still on the broad principles set out in the guidelines, there is a very general definition of sustainability agreements, which has a wide scope, so it is not truly limited only to environmental and climate change goals, but it may capture broader ESG goals. Another important general point is that actually the sustainability agreements are not identified as a distinct category. It is an agreement can be subject to multiple qualifications, and therefore from a legal standpoint being at the same time a sustainability agreement and a research and development agreement or a specialization agreement, and therefore also be subject to the evaluations and guidance provided by the guidelines for those agreements. And interestingly, in case of inconsistency, the more favorable regime shall apply in those cases. A very important notion which is used in the first part of the guidelines is that of parameters of competition. That is important because basically from the very outset the guidelines distinguish between agreements which do or do not affect parameters of competition, and the parameters of competition are identified as price, quantity, choice, quality, innovation. Clearly these are fairly traditional categories. The distinction may seem clear-cut in principle, but in practice clearly it's much more complicated because there may be purely internal decisions aligned with competitors which may not seem parameters of competition on their face, but I mean at the end of the day it's more of a quantity than a quality distinctions, because basically everything affects the internal cost or strategy of a company. But anyway, this distinction is important. It's in the economy and the architecture of the guidelines. It's at the very outset of them, and it is important because to the extent an agreement doesn't affect parameters of competition, the Commission says that it's very unlikely that that agreement is going to raise competition concerns, and makes 4 examples of agreements which do not raise competition concerns and concerning sustainability objectives. And therefore, these 4 examples do provide some reassurance, at least to some extent, to undertakings on some initiatives which should not trigger Article 101 enforcement. If instead parameters of competition are affected by an individual agreement, clearly a detailed, full assessment under Article 101 steps in. And even in this case, we have a fairly broad statement at the beginning of the relevant section of the guidelines. And although this statement, which is copied here, does use some language and wording which is fairly traditional, in the sense that it does come from judgment of the European Court of Justice on the notion of restriction by object, still probably we shouldn't underestimate this sentence in many regards. In one way, it seems interesting that this sentence goes beyond a mere indication that a contextual analysis, taking into consideration all aspects and the economic and legal context, should be taken into consideration. It goes beyond that by basically saying, or at least suggesting, or providing an indication that if the sustainability objective is the main object of the agreement, then it is likely that the agreement should be evaluated not by object, but rather by effect, which is, I mean, may sound obvious, but if one considers that Commission decisions where infringements have been ascertained only based on effects and not by object are almost non-existent, that is a promising statement, or at least we hope so. Other important aspects of the guidelines, there's not really a specific guidance on the analysis by effects, but so reference is made to the other sections of the horizontal guidelines, but there is specific reference to certain aspects, such as the independent decision-making powers of the members of the agreement, the market coverage, and clearly the restrictions or impact about prices, innovation, quality, output. There is no safe harbor dedicated to sustainability agreements. Clearly, there is no block exemption regulation for sustainability agreement. That has been seen as disappointing by many, but that's what we've got. We only have a soft safe harbor. We'll see in a second what is that. There is no dedicated there is no dedicated procedure for seeking guidance from the Commission specifically on sustainability agreements, unlike what you may see in other jurisdictions, and particularly so, for instance, in Greece with this sandbox institute they have come up with. But clearly, you may still use refer to the note to the European Commission's notice on informal guidance, which has been just revised, and hopefully that will be used or will be more attractive than it has been in the past 10 years. There is no dedicated policy or clarification on what the concept of ancillarity means in the context of sustainability agreements, which is perhaps disappointing. And there is instead a fairly wide section dedicated to how Article 101, paragraph 3, should be applied in the context of sustainability agreements. Very quickly on the safe harbor provided for sustainability standards agreement. 6 conditions have been set forth. It used to be 7, but one has been dropped after the comments which have been received on the draft guidelines. This clearly doesn't amount to a legal exclusion of the application of Article 101, but if these 6 conditions are met, the Commission, from an administrative perspective, does commit not to pursue an investigation against such sustainability standards agreement. And as I said, in regard of Article 101, paragraph 3, there are various indications specific to sustainability agreements which have been included in the horizontal guidelines for each of the 4 requisites laid down by this provision. In terms of efficiency gains, it is made clear that we're talking about a very broad scope of possible objectives. In terms of indispensability, it is made clear that clearly we're not talking about strict indispensability, we're talking about reasonable necessity to achieve those goals via the agreement. In terms of pass on to consumers, there is recognition that the benefits may not only be relating to the individual use of the products arising or resulting from the cooperation, but at the same time, so there is reference to collective benefits, individual non-use value benefits, but at the same time, when it comes to the possibility that the benefit may be brought by different groups of consumers than those who are suffering the restriction, some have argued that the Commission has been less brave than other authorities have been in this regard, by, for instance, requiring that there must be a significant overlap between the group of consumers who, on one hand, suffer the negative consequences of the restrictions, and on the other, benefit from the sustainability improvements. And clearly, on the no elimination of competition, it is important that still many dimensions of competitive aspects remain intact. So, I mean, to conclude, truly, it is an important point of reference, but that there's still much to do to achieve a greater legal level of legal certainty, as already flagged by Giorgio, and as certainly Nicole will now explain far better than I could do.
Yes, exactly, because thank you, Alessandro. The question to Nicole is, in light of what Alessandro just said, has your job become easier? Certainly it has.
Has the topic become easier? Absolutely, absolutely. I'm sorry, Madeline, I was just trying to put my slides up. Excuse me. Okay. Okay, well, just before the slides, waiting for the slides to be put up. First of all, thank you for having me, Freshfields team. It's always a pleasure to be here. Just brief introduction. I am heading the antitrust group for the global energy company ABB. So I am in-house, and I am, one of the firms, right, that we're talking about in those discussions. My aim today is to definitely contribute to the debate. Definitely, we don't have all the answers, for sure not. But I'd like to give you the idea, or at least the perspective from the in-house, how we view things. And so there is definitely general agreement that we need to do, as firms, as individuals, something for the environment, not just the environment, but sustainability in general. So we have, I think there's no doubt about this. And as Giorgio was saying, we need to act, and we cannot wait another 20 years to do something about it. And as with many initiatives, a lot of it rests on the shoulders of companies, right? It is for us to come up with new technologies that are eco-friendly. It is for us to make things move. And to be fair, a lot of regulators, a lot of agencies on both sides of the Atlantic have said, well, antitrust law will not stand in the way of your, agreements or your collaborations. You need to continue to innovate. And, we do appreciate that you may need to collaborate with your peers in order to do that. So far, so good. But then, are we given the tools to do that? Or is there still the kind of like sort of Damocles of antitrust hanging, on top of our heads? This slide is really about just setting the scene to tell you that, sustainability has become, and sometimes our obligations as companies. I mean, we have to do sustainability reports. We've got other due diligence and procurement obligations on that basis. So it's not just, a very cosmetic terms, we're sustainable. We have now obligations, legal obligations to be sustainable for most of us, depending on the industry we're playing in, right? So it's not just, a fancy term. And then, like I said, there is recognition that we should collaborate. That individual measures, even though very welcome, are not enough. I mean, climate is cross-border. It just doesn't, it's the same thing for companies. You need to collaborate to come up with industry standards or new technologies, right? And so there is general recognition, yet it's like a schizophrenic message from antitrust authorities. Yeah, collaborate, but, we're watching you. So it's very difficult for us in this context to actually really fully collaborate. And then also sustainability goals. As Giorgio Alessandro was saying, it's about the future. It's about, benefits that is very difficult to measure today. And so the benefits analysis, the traditional 1013 analysis, which is very conventional based on a lot of economic concepts, it's very difficult to square with the goals and the ambitions that we have today when it comes to sustainability, right? I don't want to be completely negative. It's always very easy to criticize, right? But I will definitely align with my colleagues here on this panel that definitely more is needed one way or the other. Change of antitrust rules, new regulatory regimes, something is needed. And before, actually, I wanted to mention that in my conclusion, but just, to bounce back on what Alessandra was saying, in Austria, they've implemented something that goes a little bit beyond what the Commission has done so far. They have a similar regime of antitrust rules as a 101, 103 style, and then they've, by law, implemented a new exemption, which basically says that if you have a sustainability approved and recognized sustainability benefit to your collaboration, you will be presumed to have a fair benefit, so a pass on to consumer. And that's a very big step, because then it's a reversal of the burden of proof on the authorities that seek to block you to prove actually, no, your negative aspects outweigh the benefits. And it's a very significant step. Austria has done it. Commission, not yet. And fair enough, it's, it's much slower in moving, but I mean, there are things that can still be done, right? So we will move on now to some remarks. Most of them have already been made from the legal aspects from my colleagues, right? But first point is, as an in-house advisor, are there specific sustainability rules? No. It's still the same rules that apply. So if you want to do an R&D standard setting, it's the same rules. Specifically, as Giorgio was saying, market share. Because, I mean, I'm no economist, right? But clearly, if you want something to move on a market, it's not going to be the smaller players that are going to drive the change. It's going to be the big players. The big players that have the money to do R&D. And so you hear in the US a lot, big is bad these days. Well, big is bad, but necessary. Because we need to make things change. We need to move. And the bigger, the more force you will have, the more impetus in the market you will have, arguably, right? And so when you're still facing with your very low, right, market share, soft harbors or harbors, they're like 20, 25%. In some industries, this is just one player, right? So, this is not, I don't want to say not good enough, but it's actually not fully appreciating the market driving forces that are necessary to make changes. To move from, like polluting hydrocarbon fuels to actually less polluting ones. You need to have big bang changes on the market. So that's what I wanted to say on this. The Commission does acknowledge, I don't know if you had picked up on that, Alessandro, in paragraph 589 of the new chapter, chapter 9 on sustainability, that there will be new assessment methodologies needed under a 103 benefits analysis for such types of collaboration, right? So the Commission does say, the message that I'm interpreting is, well, we're not done yet with the changes. We've done small step, but it is a very baby step. There is still a lot of big steps to be done. And so there's a set of light sustainability agreements that have been cleared by the Commission, right? Those ones are very unlikely going to raise concerns. And Alessandro has mentioned them, I'm not going to go back into them, but it's very light, kind of like cosmetic, labels, certification, that kind of stuff. It's generally not going to be an issue, provided that you don't extend CSI or provided that you don't use this as an excuse to basically, enter into your traditional cartel. And let me just pause 1 second on the databases. Very interesting one. It's basically allowing companies to share data on suppliers or distributors in relation to their sustainability. Are they green enough, right? But then they say there's nothing that can come out of those shared databases, by the way. You just share the databases. But what if, for example, you have a common databases with your competitors, which is allowed, and as a result of processing the data, you decide, all of you, unilaterally, not to use a supplier because that supplier is not green. And you may do that within 6 months, 1 year, each of you independently. How is that going to look in the market if a lot of the big players all of a sudden stop procuring from this one supplier? To me, it looks like collective boycott, right? But it wouldn't be. So what do? My constituency in the ABB group would say, well, that's great, Nicole, we can do data, but what can you do with it? There's still a lot of risk, and it is true. So that's one point I wanted to mention. Maybe we'll move on to the next slide. So Alessandro has mentioned the soft safe harbor. It's still, essentially based on market share or the lack of increasing price. On this one, I'd like to make a comment. There still is focus with conventional antitrust rules on prices not being increased. And it's a fair objective, absolutely. But one needs to recognize that for change to happen, there will have to be somehow some changes or impact on prices, which will then we go down again. That's normal economic cycles. When we moved, when you change technologies in markets, if you go back in history, there were initially an increase in price and then it went down, with the normal play of competition. So, at some point this focus on let's keep the prices down is completely displaced. We need to just think a bit broader on this one, right? And so just to give you a concrete example, the soft harbor of 20%, this is combined. ABB alone would represent that kind of market share in certain areas, so we're just not going to do it. It's way too risky, right? So, I appreciate the concerns, but I think, you need to have a bigger picture, especially when you talk about environmental sustainability. There's one point I also wanted to make is that the sustainability chapter, so chapter 9, focuses on horizontal agreements, so agreements with competitors. This is one thing, but it's not the full picture. As a vertically integrated company, I can tell you that we work with suppliers, we work with distributors or other channel partners a lot. And what about agreements with these guys? Can we discuss sustainability initiatives? What can we do on that aspect without falling into the trap of, imposing too many conditions on them, encroaching upon their freedom, imposing them some kind of a resale price? To be fair, the vertical block exemption does talk about sustainability on 2 instances in the block exemption regulation itself, compared to 170 plus references in the horizontal guidelines, right? They do say that in a selected distribution network, you could impose a green criteria when you select your distributors. Fair enough, right? But then, what about other resellers outside of a selective distribution context? And what about information exchanges? I mean, for those of us who have a lot of distributors, the message that came out of the new vertical block exemption is limit your information exchange to what is strictly necessary to the implementation of your agreement. In other words, especially in dual distribution context, we may consider you competitors sometimes, so do not talk a lot, do not exchange a lot of information. how does that fit with a broader sustainability initiative when you need to exchange in order to make things happen? So still a little bit of a Scottish shower, hot, cold, and it's very difficult for us to actually, position ourselves. I just wanted to briefly talk about merger control because there are, sustainability goals and rationales are arguably taken into account in merger control. I mean, the Commission does look at that. Is it gonna make, the balance tilt one way or the other in terms of getting a unconditional clearance or not? Definitely not. It's still super early stages. But it has an impact on market definition for sure. It has an impact on how negative on competition will your deal be if you are buying your closest competitor. For example, if you and the target, you have the green alternatives or the green proposal on the market, you're the only one that do that. Would that maybe look bad on a deal that, one would buy the other? Maybe so. Definitely there is debate going on, but it doesn't really move a needle so far. And then I wanted to quickly mention the AdBlue case. So Georgia has touched upon it. This was a pre-Chapter 9 case, 2021, but I mean the conduct started in 2017. And here you have, major German car makers, trying to collaborate, or at least coming together on agreeing on certain standards for the AdBlue tank. So the AdBlue is this kind of like urea-based liquid that you put in your tank. And it's supposed to basically reduce emissions. So it's a good thing, right, in the big picture. And according to the European Commission, what they did wrong in this collaboration is that they could have innovated better. They could have each individually gone the extra step to actually create more benefit ultimately in the environment, but they decided to all agree on one common minimum standard. And I just wanted to mention this quote that I think it was Volkswagen Group, it's a public press release. They basically said that this actually fails to take into account the fact that minimum technical standards are way easier to be approved by an entire industry than standards that would be really high up that not even half of the market can meet. And this is fair enough, absolutely. Now, I'm not defending the car makers. I'm not saying that they did not do anything wrong. I'm just saying that you need to really understand this dynamic when you judge these kinds of initiatives. I mean, if I were Volkswagen, I will never do anything like that again because the fines are pretty hefty. We're talking like south of 900 million. I mean, come on. It's quite a lot of money. There was something I wanted to mention on the Dutch authority. Yeah, the Dutch authority and the European Commission actually do encourage informal guidance. They do encourage companies to approach them, especially the Dutch authority. So maybe one way forward would be every time you have a big initiative where you're way above the 20% share threshold, just engage in a dialogue with the agencies, and that could be something we could consider, even though it will take forever to get their informal guidance. That's the problem, right? So basically, how do you remain compliant today? I mean, I really do not have all the answers, guys, for sure not. That said, I think the one thing you need to keep in mind if you advise your business constituency is that there are no specific rules for sustainability. It's the traditional rules that will apply, including your market share and your hardcore restrictions, for example, price fixing, right? So that you need to be really well aware of. And then when you meet your competitors in order to discuss legitimate initiatives, you need to be very careful, and all competitor encounters need to be carefully orchestrated. So practical tips: have NDAs, have objectives of your encounters or your collaboration clearly established on a piece of paper. This is why we're meeting, and this is why we need to be meeting. Very important, especially because, as Alessandra has pointed out, wording and intentions are going to be very important to qualify your agreement. And sometimes something that looks like an object, we all agree on, for example, stopping a technology or reducing our output, which is an object effect traditionally, could be seen more as an effect, offense or potential offense. So wording intentions are extremely important, so write them down. Have agendas where you write those objectives. Absolutely important. Maybe also practical tip, have your no-go areas clearly defined from the get-go, if you can, because it's not always that easy. with your business teams. So, for example, if you are meeting with your competitor to talk about technical standards for a given technology, basically just have your pipeline R&D projects completely out of the discussion, and prices, for example, would be out of the discussion as well, right? Immediate from the get-go. That would be, I think, a good tip. Keep agendas, absolutely. Consider unilateral initiatives. I know that my colleague Giampiero will talk about that a little bit, but at the end of the day, this is the only safe harbor that exists today, is the unilateral initiatives. That's pretty much that. Will it make a change on the market? Definitely not. But it's a good start, I guess. And then consider the informal guidance for sure. Not just for all of your initiatives, that would be really impractical because it may take forever to get anything out of the Commission or anything out of the national agencies. But if you're talking about the car makers type of, collaboration, why not? Because at the end of the day, the myth about companies trying to catalyze the market to reach, to reap benefits out might be true, but at the end of the day, a lot of companies do want to do the right thing. A lot of companies do want to do sustainable things. And so if your objectives are legitimate, just, stand tall, go and see an agency and ask them to sort it out for you, because at the end of the day, they need to support those initiatives. So, to conclude, and before I leave the floor to my colleague, I think it's, you can't just throw the stone at the Commission or other agencies for doing something. And if you look at what US is doing, I think we are way ahead. But definitely, we need more support in order to drive sustainable initiatives, for sure. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Nicole. Let's then hear from Giampiero. He is head of strategy and energy transition at ENGIE. So thank you for being here. So what's up in your constituency?
Thank you very much, Ermelinda. Good morning, everyone. And thanks to Freshfields for the invitation to contribute to this debate on the pursuit of sustainability goal through horizontal agreements. In light of this event, I've taken some notes, some reflection that I would like to share, that I'm pleased to share with you. Just a fundamental premise. We live in a time in which sustainability is at the core of our lives, in a moment in which climate change, scarcity of natural resources, changing biodiversity is at the core of the EU political agenda. The EU addressed the topic through its Green Deal, addressing the energy sector, and so also my presence, the environmental sector, that is accountable for more than 75% of the total emission in terms of production and use of energy. So the biggest amount of emission. And so has set climate goal to be reached by 2030 and an EU long-term strategy up to 2050. What's about Italy? Italy, after two no-binding national strategies of 2013 and 2017, has set through its new NECP in 2020 climate goal, and in order to set targets for renewables energy efficiency, for emission reduction. After this phase, after the COVID, after the conflict of Russia and Ukraine, now in July has put out on consultation a new version of NECP that adopt also the more ambitious target that have been raised upwards through Fit for 55 package and REPowerEU. That is the package by which the Europe tries to reduce the gas supply from Russia. In this new NECP, there is 40% in final energy uses by renewables, and 65% by power renewables. So a big percentage use. Basing on this ambitious target, the EU Commission issued its guidelines in order to sustain this development, in order to address this new ambition of Europe. And so reserving a prominent role for environmental issues. So ENGIE, that is a leading player in the low carbon solutions, interested in this topic, in order to reach a full decarbonization for its company and for the company and for its client, is very interested in these guidelines in the case in which they could be a real flywheel for pushing these targets. Entering a little bit more into the topic, we have talked about challenging targets. Rightly, the Commission wanted to play its role. Nevertheless, the Commission has been criticized for taking a too cautious approach, as some wanted a radical change in how this agreement could be assessed, especially due to the agreement requirement can only be lawful if it allows consumer a fair share of the resulting benefits of the agreement, as said before by my colleagues. This requirement has been interpreted rather strictly by the Commission in the past decades. This requirement implies that the agreements at least compensate the direct or indirect users of the products or service covered by the agreement for any actual or likely negative impact caused to them by the restriction of competition caused by the agreement. Okay, here there are two issues in my opinion. One is formal, because what if the benefits are on market and or customers that have nothing to do with the impacted ones? Also Nicole was saying before. Or even with effect outside the EU markets, for example, for pollution. So the word is single, so it's very peculiar, this approach, in my opinion. If I assume that the benefits go to markets or customers that have nothing to do with the impacted one, for example, if we talk of environment, if we talk of pollution, if we talk of sustainability, it would have been better to have a softer approach. And the other one is substantial, because given that we all know about the cost and complexity of sustainability, wouldn't a greener approach and therefore a softer approach to fair share compensation be more appropriate? I think yes. I think yes. Why? Because if I am a first mover that steps towards some sustainability project, some innovation in the environmental and sustainability path, I have to face more complexity than the other ones who operate in markets that are in place since 20, 30, 40 years. So, in my opinion, it's not fair. It's a point of merit to apply the same rules to me and to the ones who make traditional businesses. So, some point of view from the corporate side of my, from the corporates. The implementation of sustainability agreements, seen from our view, immediately generates some reflection. One is a matter of engagement, because companies who have to face sustainability project have to have an economic and human resources engagement on projects that in the first step are not at the core of the of the company targets, are on a parallel side. So I need engagement, I need resources, and they are not this is not so obvious. Projects of this nature would have high cost, also external, for legal support, on economics. but on this aspect, I imagine you might not mind. Okay. A specific risk could materialize, as said before by my colleagues, also on the subject of information exchange, because if I have to advise my company to address these sustainability agreements and to exchange information on the project, risking that someone says that okay, you are exchanging information that are not strictly related to the information needed by the project, is not a point. It's a point. We cannot remain with the sword or Damocles on our head, having fear to communicate or to exchange. Okay, Giorgio was saying there is the fear of sanctions, because all of you know that the sanctions are linked to turnover. So if I am a giant and I try to have an agreement with another giant, there is a giant sanction, potentially. Okay, so it could be a topic. In a situation in which, reading the guideline, I read should not fall, could not fall, so conditional tenses that don't make me sure that I will not see applied these sanctions in a field of a self-assessment. Okay, that unlikely should work, and made often on cumulative conditions. 6 for safe harbor said before. So it's not so easy from a company perspective, this point. So we welcome all the approaches that are more open, more softer, more visionary, as the Dutch one. The Dutch one that said that in the guidelines issued on sustainability that clarified that these agreements may be possible to consider the benefit, in which may be possible to consider the benefit for the wider society as a whole, so wider than the previous approach, instead of only the benefits for the user of the products involved. So it seems quite a revolution in our opinion. The perfect example is the one mentioned in the first intervention of Giorgio in 2022 on the project of carbon capture and storage between Total, Shell and Gazuni, by which the emitters had the possibility to have a project to store this CO2, so in which they could reach an agreement on a 20% of the volumes to be sold jointly in the first phase of the technical lifetime of the project, and in which the Dutch authority said that this agreement led to the creation of a new market, allowed cost saving due to the fact that the infrastructure have not more been duplicated by this agreement, and really appreciated the introduction of a new technology to store this CO2 in order to contribute to climate goals. In particular, regarding the two main pillars of this horizontal agreement, on the fair share criterion, the agreement has been qualified as agreement leading to cleaner air and less CO2 pollution for society. So a broader approach, society as a whole. On the indispensability criterion, the authority stated that to mitigate potential first mover disadvantage, the companies needed to join their development, competencies and experiences. So it's a visionary, in our opinion, point of view. And this is also what said, for example, on 15th of September, Mr. Bonomi, the president of Confindustria, saying that, in few words, that environmental sustainability cannot be separated from economic and social sustainability. So we don't have to think of two items. We have to put them together. So concluding, a few final considerations. As also my colleague Nicole was saying before, we are in a competition with other economies, as Asia, China in particular, US, which with much less stringent policies on environment and sustainability. So, in my opinion, I would have appreciated a broader vision that also took into account aspects of sustainability jointly with international competition, because the world the market is linked. We thought of developing more initiative project on this topic, but honestly, it's scarce to collaborate, exchange information, also consider the scenario of potential sanctions. Speaking of exchanging information, by the way, my field is a regulatory field. Also, right now in regulatory trade association, we are more the topic of the exchange of information is the more washed out. We don't exchange anything that is not similar to lobbying data. So there are not economic data, prices, not at all. But it's very attention this point with respect to the past. And so this point in the companies, also due to a lot of courses carried out on compliance, is a point that has a big attention with respect to the past. After 30 years from the creation of the Italian Antitrust Authority, as we were saying, as mentioned, the attention on the antitrust topic has grown faster, has grown a lot with respect to the past. But reading this guideline, I'm not convinced that these kind of guidelines are seem more similar to restrictive policies that a driving force to boost a sustainability agreement. And this is, in my opinion, the big point of this point. I think that at least on the well-known ESG topics, the antitrust world should have a Dutch-style approach, so wider, so softer, in order to boost this kind of intervention, this kind of project. Otherwise, it seems quite similar to May before the issue of these guidelines. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to Lea for having us. I think there might be a lot of questions or comments, but let's discuss them over lunch. Thank you to all for being here.